Hey guys, Winston here. Today I'm just going to go through a quick demo on the new integrations blog that was just released recently. It'll go through the Google Sheets integration specifically. And yep, so let's get started. So here I've created a brand new Google spreadsheet just for this demo, and I've given it some header columns. And whenever you use a spreadsheet with the Google Sheets integration, it's very important that the first row of your spreadsheet contains the header columns or the header label or the column labels. And this basically tells Voiceflow what kind of data you're storing in this column, and it helps us identify. It's what we use to identify each column. I like to have these in bold in my spreadsheet just so that I know, just so that it's kind of like a reminder that they're header columns. But you don't need to have them in bold. They'll work either way, just as long as you have them in the first row. Great. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump right into the different actions that you can do with the Voiceflow Google Sheets integration. So with retrieve data, you can retrieve a single row from a spreadsheet. And the first thing that you'll need to do is add a new user. So you just simply log in with your Google account, accept the permissions here, and done. So now our Google account's linked with Voiceflow, and we can actually see all of our spreadsheets here. If you don't see the spreadsheet that you want to use here, it's possible that you may have too many in your Google Drive. So what you can do then is simply use the filtering system to find the spreadsheet that you want. We can then select the sheet that you want to work with. In this case, we just have the one sheet, sheet 1. So that step's quite simple for us. You can also click on this icon here to jump directly to the spreadsheet that you're working on in case you lose a tab like this, or you don't happen to have this open. Great. So the next section, basically, it's used to determine what row you want to retrieve from the spreadsheet. So, for example, if you want to retrieve row number 1, you would just select row number for the column and a value of 1 for the value to match. You can also match on other columns, and this is why the column headers are important here, because these are basically direct mappings. So, for example, if I wanted to retrieve the first row with name equals Winston, I would just have something like this. Basically a query, and you can also use variables in this query, something like that. Great, so I'm just going to add some dummy data here and see if we can retrieve that. So one way to do this, to retrieve this row, would just be to put row number equals 2. And let's say I want to map my name, so the name that I get out from this into a name variable. I could do that. Like that. And great, so if I test this, I did get a response back, and you can see that the correct row was retrieved. Now, you don't always get something back. For example, if I put row number 3 and run the test, so the action was performed successfully, meaning that there weren't any failures. You know, the spreadsheet existed, the sheet existed, so nothing went wrong there. However, no data was returned just because row number 3 had no data in it. So another way we could have done that was just to use a query name equals Winston, and that would also grab the same row. Let's verify that. And sure enough, I managed to retrieve the same row as with the row number query. Great. So that's pretty much it for retrieve data. Pretty simple. The next action that we can use is create data. And we'll use the exact same spreadsheet here. And we're basically given a list of a bunch of values with one input box for each column. And whatever we want to create here, we can just enter that in the respective input for that column. So if I wanted to create a new row for Tyler, and again, these you can use variables in any of these inputs. Now I'm just going to use plain text, but variables are supported. And I test this. You can see that the message created row in sheet 1 appears. And here, sure enough, we can see that a new row was created with the values that we've inserted in the integration block. Cool. The next action is update data, which is quite similar to create data, except instead of just so what create data does is it just adds it to the end of the spreadsheet. With update, you can actually modify an existing row that's not instead of creating a new one. So let's see how that works. So as you can see, the bottom half is quite similar to create, which here, and so this is actually the row number that we want to modify. So let's say I wanted to get rid of my row here and replace it with these values. I could just put row number 2. One way that this could actually be practical is if you had an interaction block here and you retrieve something, and then you actually mapped the row number to a certain variable. For example, if I didn't know that this was row number 2, all I knew is that I wanted to replace the Winston row. I could retrieve here. Excuse me. Retrieve name equals Winston. And this is just to get the row number. And here, use that exact same row number which is now stored in a variable in this field here, and that way I could actually update a certain row in my column just without knowing the row number as I do here. Cool. So row number 2 and test. So this scary pop-up appears just because even though it says it's a test integration, any test you do here will actually directly modify your spreadsheet. So if you have important data, or this is maybe a shared spreadsheet that a lot of people rely on, it's probably best to either make a copy that's specific to your drive and that you can play around with, or copy the sheet here and copy to existing spreadsheet or new spreadsheet, because this test will actually directly modify the spreadsheet. So confirm, and we've updated rows 2 in sheet 1. Rows 2 has now been replaced with those values. Great. So the next and final one is delete, and this one's pretty straightforward. It simply takes in a start row, which is the row that you want to start the delete, and an end row, which is the row where we want to end the delete. So like this, delete this. So let's just try to delete everything up to that point between Tyler's row and the don't delete this row. So we want to start at row number 4 and end not at 5, but actually at 6, because the end row is actually not inclusive. It's exclusive of the end row. So 4 and 5, and not including 6. And that's what we have here. So the end row. So if you were to put 5 here, it would actually only delete just sort of how that works. Great. Just going to go next. Test integration. And again, that scary reminder. This one's probably even more important in the delete, just because this is an important spreadsheet. You don't want to accidentally delete some rows that you don't want to. So again, if you are testing the delete or update functions on an important spreadsheet, just make sure that you make a copy, or either make a copy of the spreadsheet or make a copy of the sheet within the spreadsheet, and work off that. Cool. So confirm deleted rows 4 to 6, and we see that the 2 rows that were between Tyler and don't delete this are now gone, and our spreadsheet actually moved this row up to reflect that. So when you use the delete function, any rows that result in a gap, like what happened just now, will actually result in the rows will actually move upwards to accommodate that, which is nice. Great. So that's basically all that there is for the Google Sheets integration. One last thing, you'll notice that the API block is actually gone now, and that's because it's been moved to its own integration called custom API. So the idea is that if you need to make an API call and you don't see the integration that you want listed here, I mean, we only really have Google Sheets right now, so it's going to be a while before we can cover most of the use cases. But if you don't see it listed here, just click Custom API, and this is basically the same as it's the exact same really as the old API block. So you have all of your request types here, and this should look quite familiar because this is very similar to the old API block. All of that's there. Same mapping output that you're familiar with, object path, variable, and the test is also quite similar. So if you're looking around for the API block, that's where it's gone. Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I hope you guys hope you make some really interesting find some really interesting ways to use this. Thanks. Bye.